The athletes, they have this equation in their head that negative emotions equals poor performance. And very often, I think our field, sports psychology, also has that equation in their heads, right? That negative emotions equals poor performance. Hence, as a sports psychologist, I need to help the athletes have the right emotions. And I argue that is actually a big mistake because that's not how the environment at the Olympic Games works. Because if you're in a situation where the outcome is uncertain and the outcome means the world to you, invariably uncomfortable thoughts and feelings will arise. And if then you think you have to get rid of these emotions, you have to get rid of these thoughts, you have to change them, then all you're doing is you fight your own mind.
欢迎来到本期诺亚教练谈。在今天的节目中，我与 Peter Haber 博士谈论了正念和其他与表现有关的话题。他是一位体育心理学家，为美国奥运会和残奥会工作。我希望你喜欢今天的节目。
Good morning, Dr. Peter Haber. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thanks for having me, Noah.
Can you tell us a bit about your academic background and your professional career and journey in the field that you're in?
Sure. So my journey kind of started way back when I was still in Austria, in my birth country. I was going to university there in sports science. And while I was doing that, I was also a professional athlete that played professional ice hockey over there. And during that curriculum, I just became super curious about the psychology of performance. And the sports sciences obviously cover different buckets. So sports psychology was one of the buckets, but I wanted to dive deeper into that. And then after retiring from playing professional sports after about 10 years or so, went back to graduate school, went to Boston University, get a master's in counseling, followed by a doctoral degree in counseling psychology with an emphasis on sports psychology. And then that eventually led to a part-time 2-year position at the Olympic Training Center here in Colorado Springs as a research fellow. And then that led to full-time employment, and I've been here ever since.
And can you explain to listeners what does here mean right now? So what are you doing at the moment?
So what I'm doing at the moment, what I've done for the last 25 years, is working with Olympic hopefuls on their journey to qualifying for the Olympic Games and then to medal at the Games.
Okay. And do you work with certain sports, or is it a wide variety of sports that you work with?
I'm assigned to summer team sports. I also have some individual sport athletes, but my main focus right now is on team sports.
Okay. And so I had the pleasure of attending your workshop at the ASP conference, and it was a really amazing experience for me. So I was really excited to be able to speak with you today and kind of share with listeners what I learned and touch on some of the concepts that were discussed in that workshop and also go beyond that. And a lot of it is going to be around this idea of mindfulness. And to start with, I guess it's a simple but also maybe a difficult question. What is mindfulness for people who don't necessarily know what that is?
Yeah, mindfulness, there are sort of different definitions out there, slightly varying definitions, but one that I like is mindfulness is the self-regulation of attention. So aiming attention, switching attention, the inhibition of elaborate processing, and doing that with an attitude of openness and curiosity and flexibility. So if we unpack that a bit, it's about aiming attention. It's about sustaining attention. It's about not getting lost in the story in your head. And there's almost always a story in one's head. And what this attitude of curiosity and openness comes in is rather than, taking the stance of I shouldn't be having these thoughts or I shouldn't be having these feelings, I'm more curious about what thoughts and feelings are showing up and how do those thoughts and feelings impact my ability to pay attention.
And we're going to get into this more during the conversation, because what you mentioned there, some of those things are very different to other approaches that athletes, that everybody might have encountered with, as opposed to necessarily trying to change those thoughts that are occurring. Can you talk about your journey to mindfulness, and you also use ACT principles or practitioner? Can you briefly explain what ACT is, but mainly your journey into this world of mindfulness?
Yeah, let me start with the journey before I explain ACT. So I had the good fortune as a graduate student at Boston University to work with a national team that became an Olympic team and that went and won a gold medal, and then I got Olympic Games. And I kind of thought, I kind of had this sports psychology thing figured out because I was sort of trained in traditional sports psychology, working on confidence, being cool, calm, and collected, and so forth. But then in successive games, when athletes sort of did not reach their potential, it became clear to me that this approach actually is very limited. And I thought I needed a change to give the athletes I work with the best chance to be successful at the games. And that's when I, based on those experiences, I made a radical shift towards mindfulness initially, and then towards ACT. So ACT stands for Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, or Acceptance and Commitment Training, where you work on this idea of being flexible psychologically. And the way that's defined is can I be present? Can I be open to whatever is showing up in my mind? And can I take actions based on my values? So for me, what became paramount then to those experiences of failure really is that attention is the currency of performance, not thoughts and not feelings. So as an athlete, I want to be in charge of my attention. So can I be present in the here and now, right? Can I anchor myself in the present moment? And in order to do that, I want to be open to whatever thoughts and feelings will arise, because they will arise. And then with that openness, I'm going to be in a much better position to take actions that are guided by my deeply held values rather than my goals.
Very interesting. And that was one of the things that stood out to me, was also this idea that attention is the currency of performance. And I want to dive into that in a moment as well. And I think for listeners, the best way to kind of understand this is also maybe to experience. So if we could go through a guided demonstration or of like a 1 to 3 minute guided mindfulness activity, that would be really valuable. So if people are listening and they're at home or where they are, that they can just take a minute now and just try and experience at firsthand what this idea is about.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really great suggestion, Noah, because it's one thing to talk about mindfulness. It's a different thing to actually experience it. And I think it actually makes more sense once one experiences it. So yeah, let's give that a go. But obviously, if you listen to this, don't do this while you're driving. So if you're driving, pull over right now, or just keep driving and focus on driving. But because I'm going to ask you in a moment to close your eyes just for a moment to begin with. So I'm going to try and ring my bells here. I don't know if they hear that on the podcast, but just to signal the start and signal the end here, we'll give this a try. So let's get comfortable with your back straight, and then close your eyes for a moment and just turn your attention inward and notice right now what thoughts are present, what feelings are present, what is your mood. So I'll call this the weather check of the mind. Just like we can check the weather outside, we can also check the internal weather. So just notice. There's no need to change anything. Just notice what is present right now. Simply be aware of that. And now with that awareness of the weather, open your eyes now and look straight ahead and just notice what you see. And as best as you can, tune into seeing. And now slowly move your head towards your left shoulder. And as you do that, stay connected to what you see. So really ground yourself in the space you're in. And once you get to your left shoulder, look over your left shoulder as far as you can go, twisting your neck, your upper torso. And then slowly come back towards center. Stay connected to seeing as best as you can. And once you're back at center, look up at the ceiling or the sky, and then look down into your lap. Stay connected to seeing, come back to center. And now slowly move your head towards your right shoulder. Notice what you see. And once you get to your right shoulder, look over your right shoulder as far as you can go, twisting your neck, your upper torso. And then slowly come back towards center. Stay connected to what you can see. And once you're back at center, close your eyes again for a moment and notice what's different right now. And then open your eyes again as we come to the end of the practice. So very brief practice, right? Working on being aware of what's present, and then taking charge of attention by tuning into seeing, adding some movement to that. So the question I would have for you, Noah, as well as for the listeners, what was different at the end of the practice?
For me, this time and also the first time I did that a couple of weeks ago, as I felt afterwards calmer. Initially, okay, I'm recording something. I had a meeting before this, was a bit stressed or slightly more anxious than I was after going through that brief process, that weather check.
Mm-hmm. So would it be safe to say that during the weather check, you noticed some of those emotions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you first asked me, like, that weather check, my first thought or the first feeling was like a little, like my heart rate was a bit up, just a bit tense.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. So that first part of the practice, right, the weather check, that was just about being aware, right? We weren't trying to change anything.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I asked you to open your eyes and we did the movement, then what happened?
I just lasered in and I noticed things in my apartment here that I never noticed before. Like I noticed there was a little shade on the wall that was a different color than in the other parts of it. And I just was taking control of my attention. I was just following those instructions and nothing else was there really.
Yeah. So very good, right? So by taking charge of attention, first of all, I would argue is you anchored yourself in the present moment.
Mm-hmm.
And you did that in the presence of some of those anxious feelings. And those anxious feelings actually didn't get in the way at all. And then lo and behold, as a side effect, they changed, even though that wasn't our intention for them to change.
Mm-hmm.
So getting calmer, that was sort of like a bonus.
Yeah.
But this is where folks often misunderstand mindfulness, in my opinion, is they think it's about getting calmer when it's actually about being aware and about being present.
Yes. And that's something I've been learning now also from reading more, is that, like you just said, that's a byproduct, but not the goal of that. Of the experience of these mindfulness practices is to anchor your attention, be present, become aware of what's going on. And it kind of goes back to what you mentioned, this idea of openness and curiosity towards what's going on, which I believe you mentioned earlier in that definition.
Correct. Yes. So if you come back to that, the weather check and that awareness of little tense, a little nervous, right? Wanting to do a good job. That tells us something about you that's quite beautiful, that doesn't need to be fixed. And I would venture is that tells us, you want to do a good job, right? And you want the interview and the podcast to go well. Hence, but there's some uncertainty. It might not go well because this guy might not be any good on the microphone, whatever, right? You just never know. And then on top of it, he has a funny accent, so, but that desire for this to go well doesn't need to be fixed, right? Because that sense of anxiety actually most likely was quite helpful, because it helped you actually prepare for this session. You didn't just show up, I'm just going to wing it, right? Mm-hmm. So even though that anxiety might be uncomfortable, it actually often is quite helpful. Let me sort of backtrack for a moment, right? With the emotions and coming back to the little practice we just did. And when I said that being calm is a side effect, is a bonus. We're both here. You're in your living room. I'm in my home office, so to speak. There are no threats here. Yes, here in Colorado Springs, there's some mountain lions and some bears, but they're outside, right? So it's fairly easy to be calm in a situation where you're safe and that is not challenging. But when you're in a challenging situation where there's a threat, and in sport there's usually a threat to the ego, then it's actually quite difficult to be calm. So, and to have, what we generally refer to as pleasant emotions, right? So at the Olympic Games, in this space that I have the privilege to work in, athletes may want to feel calm, but they often have very different emotions. I use this quote from Nadal. He once said that I had doubts in all the 11 years that I played here. So if I ask my athletes, hey, do you want to be that guy and have doubts for 11 years? They always say, no, I don't want to be that guy. And then I ask, well, why don't you want to be that guy? Well, that doesn't sound like fun. And if you have doubts like that, right, then you will not perform well. Aha, okay, so there's this idea in your head that if you have an unpleasant emotion, such as doubt, then it'll impact your performance negatively, right? So then obviously after that conversation, I sort of revealed, this is Rafael Nadal talking about the French Open. And at that point in time, he had won the French Open 9 times. Or the 11 times he played there, right? You don't want to be that guy. Then sort of the light bulb goes on. Oh, wait a minute. There's something going on here. I want to pay attention because maybe the doubt isn't bad. And Nadal says doubt is good for you in life, because when you have doubt, you always prepare. And in his case, right, he doesn't underestimate opponents. And, sort of followed, his career, and you read his interviews, particularly Grand Slams, and there's this consistency that, with the first round, the second round, the third round, Nadal always talks about his opponent in the first round, the second round, the third round, as the most difficult opponent ever. And by doing that, right, by sort of feeding the doubt, he is ensuring that he's always prepared. So the doubt for him is actually really, really functional. So I try to emphasize the difference between the function of an emotion and the form of an emotion, right? The form of emotion, in this case, doubt or anxiety, that form is unpleasant. That form is negative and uncomfortable. And if you go into a room of athletes and you ask, hey, do you want some anxiety? Do you want some pressure? Do you want some tension? Do you want to sign up for that? the answer is no, I don't want to sign up for that, right? So we don't want those uncomfortable thoughts and feelings, and that's understandable, that's normal, right? But the problem is the environment that we're in will often serve up those uncomfortable thoughts and feelings. You know, the athletes, they have this equation in their head that negative emotions equals poor performance. And very often, I think our field, sports psychology, also has that equation in their heads, right? That negative emotions equals poor performance. Hence, as a sports psychologist, I need to help the athletes have the right emotions and the right thoughts for that matter, right? So thoughts of confidence, feelings of calm, feelings of being composed. And I argue that is actually a big mistake because that's not how the environment at the Olympic Games works. Because if you're in a situation where the outcome is uncertain and the outcome means the world to you, invariably uncomfortable thoughts and feelings will arise. And if then you think you have to get rid of these emotions, you have to get rid of these thoughts, you have to change them, then all you're doing is you fight your own mind rather than doing what really matters, which is taking charge of your attention. So coming back again to Nadal, that doubt was very functional for him. Even though the form of the emotion was unpleasant, the function was useful. So I'm always curious, what is the function of the emotion here in this given context? And is it helping you or is it hurting you? If it's helping you, we don't have to worry about the function of the emotion at all.
And in those cases where it's hurting the athlete, are those situations where it's hindering them from performing well, or can you expand on that side of the equation?
Yeah, so the metaphor I use is that the mind is a thought and emotion producing factory. So all day long, your mind, my mind, the mind of my athletes will produce thoughts and feelings. It was designed that way by evolution. It helps us navigate our environment. It helps us survive. It helps us be on the top of the food chain, so to speak, right? So that's all. Thoughts and feelings are helpful, but that thought and emotion producing factory comes with a built-in thief. And the argument I make is that this built-in thief that comes with that factory that produces thoughts and emotions all day long steals something that is very precious for athletes. And when I ask the athletes, what is it the thief steals? Almost always they'll say the thief will steal confidence. And they're all in agreement with that, right? That's the most precious thing for an athlete, is to have confidence, to believe that you're going to win. I disagree with that. I think what the thief steals is attention, the ability to be present. So coming back to your question, when those unpleasant negative emotions get in the way, they get in the way because they steal an athlete's ability to pay attention. Now, the interesting thing is that can also happen on the flip side of things. So pleasant, positive emotions, confident emotions can also steal your ability to pay attention, to actually be fully present, and to be in the here and now. So yeah, I understand confidence is pleasant. I understand we want it, but confidence can also make you complacent and actually take your foot off the gas pedal. Yes, so Rafael Nadal has this great quote in his autobiography that I absolutely love. And it goes like this. And he uses this quote talking about performing at Wimbledon. So he says, "What I battle hardest in a tennis match is to quiet the voices inside my head, to shut everything out but the contest itself, to concentrate every atom of my being on the point I'm playing. If I made a mistake on the prior point, let it go. Should a thought of victory suggest itself, crush it." So let's unpack this and let's start with the very end. Should a thought of victory suggests itself, crush it. Now, why does Nadal tell us to crush a pleasant, comfortable, and positive thought about victory? He is telling us to crush that thought because he understands that thought takes him into the future that hasn't happened yet, right? A thought of victory is about the future. So Nadal tells us to crush that thought because he knows he wants to be present, right? What I battle hardest in a tennis match is to quiet the voices inside my head. So he understands his mind is a thought and emotion producing factory, and those thoughts and emotions can be distracting. He wants to shut everything out but the contest itself. That's the only thing that matters in that moment, the contest itself. Not what happened last month and not what's going to happen next month, right? And to concentrate every atom of his being on the point he's playing. So Nadal is saying here, attention is the currency of performance, not thoughts and not feelings. If I made a mistake on the prior point, he says, let it go, right? So the prior point and thinking about that, that's about the past. You want to be present. You want to be present. So this brings us back again to this ACT model of psychological flexibility is, can I be in the present moment, be open to whatever thoughts and feelings show up, and take actions based on my values? Then I'm going to be most flexible psychologically, which means I can skillfully respond to whatever that thought and emotion producing factory is offering up. And often it will be unpleasant thoughts and feelings.
I want to go into ACT. We've kind of touched on it, and this behavioral goals versus emotional goals. Can you talk on the difference between these two? And then this idea, which you sort of mentioned, psychological flexibility versus psychological rigidity.
Yeah. So just to warn the listeners for a moment, I'm kind of a mean sports psychologist, and I tell my athletes, I don't care how you feel. So let's just let that sit for a moment, right? So you have the psychologist, you want some help from this guy, and then he says, I don't care how you feel. The reaction to that is like, this guy must be like a first-rate jerk, okay? That would be a very normal, very healthy reaction, right? Now, though, what I'm trying to do is to spark your curiosity. Like, why do you not care about how I feel? Why do you not care about what thoughts are present? Well, I take that position because the feelings that come up, the thoughts that come up, aren't actually that much under your control. You kind of think they are, but they're not. Because remember, the mind is a thought and emotion producing factory. And I don't really want to help you with your feelings. I'm more interested in your behaviors, in your actions. So ACT does this wonderful job of focusing on behavioral goals that we might have rather than emotional goals. Now, emotional goals are very normal. They come quickly, right? Same with in sports, particularly in my arena at the Olympic Games, outcome goals. I don't have to ask the athletes about what their goals are. I know they want to qualify for the games, and I know they want to win the gold medal. That's a given, right? Now, with that outcome goal quickly comes an emotional goal. And the emotional goal is I want to be confident. What's more interesting to me, though, and this is why I say I don't care how you feel, is I care that you notice how you feel. I care that you notice what thoughts are present. Because then we are stepping into awareness, and we're starting to work on skills to skillfully relate to whatever that thought and emotion producing factory that is the human mind will produce in that environment. And these are behavioral skills, right? So how I relate to my thoughts, how I relate to my feelings in that moment of competition is a behavioral skill that I can work on. And when I do that, right, when I'm aware of the thoughts and feelings that show up, and then take charge of my attention and take actions guided by my values, then I'm going to be psychologically flexible, and I'm going to be in a much better position to actually compete to my potential. So to give an example, this is an example I use a lot with my athletes. So the athlete says, it's the only way to describe it. It feels like the gallows. It feels like you're about to be hung. It's the only way to describe it. Describing the experience right before the Olympic final. Again, I ask the question, do you want to feel that way? Athlete says, no, I don't want to feel that way. Why not? Well, if I feel that way, I will perform poorly. Okay? So here's where I come in. I don't care how you feel. I care that you notice how you feel, right? And now you notice that, hey, if I feel this way, I perform poorly. Hence, now I need to change that feeling. That is a mistake, because then again, you battle your mind and actually you become psychologically rigid. You're trying to avoid feeling normal emotions. So then again, at this point, I reveal who that athlete was. And this is an athlete named Chris Hoy. An American audience will not recognize him. He's a British, a Scottish track cyclist who has won 6 gold medals at the Olympic Games. And he described how he felt before his first Olympic final in an event called the Kilo. So it was a time trial, 1,000 meters on the track. And he was the reigning world champion, and he got to go last. When you get to go last, you see everybody else's time roll in. And he had to see how 3 of the last 4 guys beat the Olympic record. So it was super fast, right? So now it's super fast times. You don't know if you can match those times. You've prepared for that race for 10 years, whatever. So the outcome is uncertain. The outcome means the world to you. Well, guess what shows up? It feels like the gallows shows up. Chris Hoy then talks about how when he sat on his bike, he listened to the clock ticking down. Listening, that sensory perception, right? I can turn my attention to that sensory perception. The moment I do that, I anchor myself in the present. Then he talks about gripping the handlebars, the tactile sensation I can focus on. He talked about pressing his feet against the pedals. It's a tactile sensation I can focus on. He comes back to listening to that clock ticking down, 10, 9, 8, and so forth, all the way to 0. Then the gun goes off, and then he focuses on riding the bike, right? So he is aware of the feelings that are present. He's open to them. He actually says it's how you feel prior to writing the life of your life, and everybody feels that way, right? So he's open. He normalizes those emotions, and then he comes back to focus and to take an action that is guided by his values. In this case, the value is being a competitor and wanting to compete. So he's displaying psychological flexibility, meaning he's open to unpleasant thoughts and feelings. He can anchor himself in the present moment, and he takes actions guided by his values. Psychological rigidity is the opposite of that, is when we aren't open to thoughts and feelings. We want to push them away. We don't want to feel certain things, and we don't want to have certain thoughts, right? That experiential avoidance makes it more likely for the thief to steal attention. So we can't be in the present moment. And then we're more likely to forget about taking effective actions.
感谢你收看本期诺亚教练谈。我希望你认为讨论内容充实而有价值。你可以在影片下方找到更多关于我的讯息，以及我的网站和社交媒体的链接。如果你有任何问题，请联系我。下次见。